My mother declared me broken on Christmas Day 5 years ago. It wasn't a dramatic table-flipping scene. It was worse. It was quiet, delivered with the casual cruelty of a woman stating an obvious fact, like the sky being blue or the turkey being dry. My name is Serena. I was 33 at the time, sitting at my parents' polished mahogany dining table, surrounded by the scent of pine and simmering resentment. My younger sister, Roslyn, who was then 29, sat opposite me, glowing with the smug satisfaction of a life lived according to our mother's blueprint. She had the successful husband, the 2 perfect children, and a 3rd on the way. I had a house I'd bought with my own money and a diagnosis of unexplained infertility that my family treated like a terminal character flaw. The conversation, as it always did, turned to legacy. My mother, Christine, picked at her green beans and sighed. A family is a tree, you know. It needs branches to grow, strong branches. Her eyes slid over to me and the corner of her mouth tightened. A woman's body is meant for one thing, Serena. If it can't do that, it's just a house with no one home. My father, Randolph, stared intently at his plate, mastering the art of strategic silence he'd perfected over 40 years of marriage. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up my neck. I was a house with no one home, empty, defective. Before I could even form a response, Rosalind placed a hand over her gently rounded stomach and beamed at our mother. "Well, Mom, our family line is safe. We're pregnant again." The table erupted. My father finally looked up, a relieved smile spreading across his face. My mother clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with tears of genuine joy. They fawned over Rosalind, asking about due dates and names, their voices a symphony of adoration. I became invisible, a ghost at the feast. Rosalind shot me a look across the table, not of malice, but of pity, which was so much worse. It was the look you give a stray dog, a broken toy. I excused myself, the lie of a headache tasting like ash in my mouth. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the festive wrapping paper was crammed into trash bags, I confronted them in the living room. The Christmas tree lights blinked, casting mocking little stars across their faces. "What you said tonight," I started, my voice shaking, "was unforgivable." Christine didn't flinch. She sipped her brandy and looked at me over the rim of the glass. "The truth often is, dear. Rosalind is building a family, a legacy. What are you building? An empty house for one? It's an embarrassment." I turned to my father, my last hope. "Dad, are you going to say anything?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "Your mother just wants what's best for you, Serena, for the family." That was it, the final snap, the realization that I wasn't a daughter to them, I was a failed project, a disappointment they were tired of hiding. "I am your family," I whispered, the words feeling hollow. My mother stood up, her face a mask of cold resolve. She walked over to me and placed a hand not on my shoulder, but on the front door, as if showing me the way out. "You are a dead end, Serena," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal tone. "You bring nothing to this family's future. So here's the deal. Don't come back. Don't call. Don't show up for holidays with your sad eyes and your empty womb. Don't come back until you have something real to offer." I drove home in a daze, the festive lights of the neighborhood blurring through my tears. I walked into my beautiful, quiet house, the house they called empty, the one they said was too big for someone with no future, and closed the door behind me. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the silent foyer. It was the sound of an ending and a beginning. They wanted me to vanish. I did, and then I rebuilt. The first year was the hardest. The silence in my house was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every sound. Every creak of the floorboards, Every hum of the refrigerator was a reminder of my isolation. My family had performed a surgical excision, cutting me out of their lives so cleanly that it felt like I'd never existed at all. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive birthday card. I was 33 years old and utterly alone, but solitude, I learned, is a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. I started by filling the silence with noise, podcasts, music, audiobooks. Then, gradually, I started to prefer the quiet. It was in that quiet that I began to hear my own voice again. A voice that wasn't pleading for acceptance or defending my existence. I poured all the energy I'd once spent on my family into my work. I was a strategic communications consultant, and I went from being a freelancer to the founder of my own small remote firm. I worked relentlessly, building a client list that spanned 3 continents. My days were filled with Zoom calls and strategy sessions, my nights with drafting proposals and analyzing market data. My business became my baby, the thing I nurtured and grew. About 2 years in, I got a message on LinkedIn from Mekhi Evans. We'd been in the same program in college, 2 of the only people who actually enjoyed late-night study sessions on rhetorical theory. He was now heading a tech startup in Seattle and needed help with a brand launch. What started as a one-off contract quickly evolved into a partnership. He was sharp, funny, and treated me like an equal, not a pity case. Our weekly video calls became less about work and more about life. He was the first person in years who asked me how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. With financial security came a different kind of freedom. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before my marriage ended and the infertility nightmare began. The second spare bedroom, the one I'd once secretly imagined as a nursery with pale yellow walls and a white crib, became my studio. I covered the floors in canvas drop cloths, splattered the walls with paint, and let the smell of turpentine and oil fill the space. I painted huge abstract canvases full of the chaotic, vibrant colors I was finally allowing myself to feel. The other spare room, the one Rosalind had suggested would be perfect for a playroom, became my office, my war room. One wall was covered in a massive whiteboard filled with client flowcharts and project timelines. My desk faced the window overlooking the garden I'd learned to cultivate. The guest room downstairs, once intended for my parents' visits, was now a home gym. I'd traded a floral bedspread for a Peloton and a set of weights. I remembered Rosalind walking through the house shortly after I bought it, her arms crossed, a critical look on her face. "That house is way too big for someone with no future," she'd said, her tone dripping with sisterly concern that was really just thinly veiled contempt. She was wrong. My future wasn't empty. It was just mine. I had built a life inside these walls that was full and meaningful, a life that didn't require anyone else's approval. For 5 years, I had peace. Then, last Tuesday, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Serena?" The voice was thin, reedy, and instantly recognizable. It was my mother. 5 years of silence, and she spoke my name as if we'd talked yesterday. I didn't say anything. "Serena, are you there? I need you to listen to me," she said, her voice gaining its familiar demanding edge. There was no apology, no preamble, just need. "Things are difficult." Percy left her. He just packed a bag and walked out. Left her with the kids and a mountain of debt. I remained silent, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear her take a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "They're losing the house. They have nowhere to go. Serena, you have all that space." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I finally found my voice. "What do you want from me?" Christine's voice cracked with manufactured desperation, a tool she'd wielded my entire life. "It's Rosalind. You're her last hope. I let my mother's words hang in the air for a full day before I called her back. I spent that time talking to Meki, walking through my garden, and sitting in my studio, surrounded by the life I had built. I wasn't the same woman they had thrown away. I wasn't going to let them detonate my peace. I will agree to a discussion, I said when Christine finally answered, my voice level and calm. You, Dad, and Roslyn can come here on Saturday at noon. We will talk. That is all I'm agreeing to. She tried to argue, to push for more, but I cut her off. Noon on Saturday, that's the offer. I hung up before she could reply. They arrived precisely at noon, pulling up in a dented minivan that was a significant downgrade from the luxury SUV Roslyn used to drive. My father got out first, looking older and more stooped than I remembered. Then my mother, her posture rigid with forced dignity. Last was Roslyn. The 5 years had not been kind to her. Her face was pale and puffy, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She looked brittle, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped one too many times. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. For a moment, we all just stood there. I saw the flicker of shock in their eyes. I wasn't the wayfish, heartbroken woman they'd cast out. I was 38 now, fit from the gym in my guest room and dressed in tailored trousers and a silk blouse. My hair was styled, my makeup was subtle, and I met their gazes with a calm confidence that felt like armor. You look, well, my mother said, the words tasting like a concession she didn't want to make. I am, I replied, stepping aside to let them in. Please, come in. They walked into the foyer, their eyes darting around, taking in the changes. The drab, beige walls were now a warm gallery white, hung with pieces of my art. The generic furniture was gone, replaced with clean modern pieces. It's very minimalist, Roslyn muttered, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. It was her way of calling it sterile, empty. It's uncluttered, I corrected gently, leading them into the living room. My father sank into an armchair without a word, looking deeply uncomfortable. My mother and Roslyn sat ramrod straight on the sofa, a pair of displaced queens surveying a foreign territory. So, Christine began, getting straight to the point. As I said, Roslyn is in a terrible position. Percy was a snake. He cleaned out their accounts. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and the surprising thing was, I almost meant it. I wasn't sorry for Roslyn, but for the idea of anyone going through that. We need a place to stay, Roslyn said, her voice cracking. Just for a little while. Until I can get back on my feet. I looked at her, at the desperation warring with the deep-seated entitlement in her eyes. This was the woman who had pitied me, who had stood by and watched as our mother shredded my soul. Before we discuss that, I said, standing up, let me show you the house. It's been a while. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces, but they followed me. I led them down the main hallway, the same one Roslyn had once declared a waste of space. I stopped outside the first door on the left, the room that was supposed to be a nursery. I pushed it open. The room was a riot of color. Canvases leaned against every wall, some taller than I was. An easel stood in the center of the room, holding a half-finished painting, jars of brushes, palettes smeared with paint, and the sharp, clean scent of turpentine filled the air. It was a room bursting with life, with creation. My mother's lips thinned. A hobby. I ignored her and moved to the next door, the would-be playroom. I opened it to reveal my office. The massive whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in complex diagrams and notes. My dual monitor setup sat on a sleek, modern desk, humming quietly. Books on business strategy and market analysis lined the shelves. This is where I work, I said simply. My firm has clients in 7 countries now. They were silent, utterly, completely silent. The narrative they had built around me, the sad, barren spinster in her big, empty house, was crumbling before their eyes. I hadn't just survived. I had built an empire in the rooms they had designated for a life I couldn't have. I led them back to the living room. The air was thick with their shock and my quiet satisfaction. They sat down, looking smaller than they had before. I remained standing, feeling for the first time like I was the one in charge. My mother looked around the room, her gaze cold and assessing, as if recalculating a complex equation. She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "So," she said, her voice as sharp and icy as a shard of glass, "when do we move in?" A slow smirk spread across my face. They still didn't get it. They never would. I met my mother's icy gaze and allowed a small, tight smile. "Move in? I don't think you understand. This isn't a negotiation. You asked for my help. I am offering you a place to stay for 2 nights, 48 hours. After that, you'll need to have found other arrangements." A stunned silence fell over the room. Rosalind's jaw dropped. 2 nights? Serena, I have 3 children. Where are we supposed to go? That sounds like a question for the person who created that situation, not the one who was disowned by her family 5 years ago, I said, my voice even. The guest room and the pull-out sofa are yours. The children can have sleeping bags on the floor. Take it or leave it. They took it. An hour later, the minivan returned and the chaos began. Rosalind's children, 13-year-old Felicity, 8-year-old Mason, and 6-year-old Chloe, spilled into my pristine home like a tidal wave of noise and sticky fingers. Mason immediately started trying to climb my bookshelves, while Chloe chased my cat, who fled under my bed and refused to come out. I spent the next day observing the wreckage of Rosalind's perfect life. She was a ghost, drifting from room to room with a wine glass permanently attached to her hand, her eyes vacant. My mother, on the other hand, was in her element, directing traffic and issuing critiques. "This wall color is so cold, Serena. A nice warm taupe would make it feel more like a home," she'd say, while simultaneously ignoring her screaming grandchildren. It was a jarring flashback to a dinner party years ago, when I'd mentioned wanting to keep the guest room for myself as a quiet reading space. "How selfish," Christine had chided me in front of everyone. "A home is for family, not for one person to hoard space." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. The only island of calm in the storm was Felicity. She was quiet and watchful, with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. That evening, while the others were arguing over the television, I found her standing in the doorway of my studio, staring at the large, half-finished canvas on my easel. "What is it supposed to be?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Right now, it's just feelings, anger mostly, but there's some peace in there too." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on a slash of vibrant yellow. "I get that." She didn't say anything else, just stood there for another minute before slipping away. The next afternoon, Meki came by to drop off some contracts. He walked in just as Mason knocked over a vase of flowers I'd cut from my garden. Water and petals went everywhere. Rosalind didn't even look up from her phone, and Christine just sighed dramatically. I cleaned it up myself, my jaw tight. Meki followed me into the kitchen. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," I lied. He leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "Serena, I've known you for 20 years. You're not fine. You're enduring. This is an invasion." He paused, then said, "You need to protect yourself. Document everything. Every passive-aggressive comment. Every mess they make. Every demand. Record them if you have to. They taught you your worth by showing you what they valued. Maybe it's time to teach them who they were." His words struck a chord. He was right. This wasn't about being the bigger person anymore. This was about survival. That night, long after the house had finally fallen into a tense silence, I went into my office to finish some work. I noticed my laptop was slightly askew on the desk, not how I'd left it. A prickle of unease went down my spine. On a hunch, I opened my email program and checked the sent folder. My blood ran cold. There it was. An email, sent less than an hour ago from my account. It was addressed to a man I recognized as a former colleague of Rosalind's, now a headhunter. And attached to it was a password-protected file labeled Client Contacts. The body of the email was short and sickeningly familiar. It was Rosalind, pretending to be me, offering up my entire client list for a finder's fee. She was trying to sell my business out from under me, from inside my own home. I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face, and let the rage burn through me. It was a clean, clarifying fire. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Mekhi was right. This was war. The next morning was their last. The 48-hour deadline was up at noon. I found Rosalind in the kitchen, pouring herself a coffee as if she owned the place. I held up my phone, the screen displaying the sent email. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She glanced at it and shrugged, not even having the decency to look ashamed. "I need to make money, Serena. You have so many clients you wouldn't even miss a few. You broke into my private account and tried to sell my professional contacts." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's not stealing if we're family. We're supposed to help each other." The audacity of it stole my breath. Before I could respond, my mother swept into the room, a Bible in her hand. She'd clearly overheard. "Serena, your sister is desperate," Christine said, her voice dripping with pious condescension. "You need to have some compassion. God gave you this house, this success, so that you could serve your blood. It is your duty to provide for them." "God had nothing to do with it," I snapped back. "I built this life, and this house is not a community resource center. It's my home." My father shuffled in, drawn by the raised voices. He wrung his hands, his eyes darting between us. "Now, girls, let's just calm down. We can work this out." I turned the full force of my glare on him. "Work this out? Where was this energy 5 years ago, Dad? Where was your voice when she—" I pointed a trembling finger at my mother. "Called me a dead end and threw me out? You were silent. Your silence was an answer. So you don't get to play mediator now." He shrank back, his face pale. I spent the rest of the morning on the phone with Mekhi. He listened to the whole story, his silence punctuated by sharp intakes of breath. "Okay," he said when I finished. "Phase 1 is containment. Change every password you have. Phase 2 is offense. I know a guy who does private security. We can get some discrete cameras installed today. Legally, it's your house, you can monitor the common areas. We need to know what they're really planning." By mid-afternoon, a technician posing as an internet repairman had installed several tiny, nearly invisible cameras in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. That evening, I told my family I had a business dinner and left. In reality, I drove to a nearby park and watched the live feed on my phone, my assistant Aaliyah on the phone with me from her own apartment. Aaliyah had been my rock for 3 years. She was fiercely loyal, whip-smart, and had a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. "They're vultures, Serena," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Let's find out what they really want." We didn't have to wait long. Once they thought I was gone, the masks came off. I watched as Rosalind paced the living room, talking on the phone to someone I couldn't hear. "No, it's perfect," she said, her voice giddy. "She's barely here. The mail comes to a P.O. box, but I can get a few bills redirected. If I can prove I've been living here for 30 days, I can establish tenancy. My lawyer says it'll be a nightmare for her to evict me. Maybe I can even argue I have an equity stake. Emotional distress, family obligation. She'll have to buy me out to get rid of me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Aaliyah let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. It wasn't just about a place to crash. This was a calculated hostile takeover. Roslyn wasn't just trying to move in. She was trying to stake a legal claim to my home. I drove back, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I walked in to find them all sitting around the dinner table, eating leftovers from my fridge. They looked up, surprised to see me. My mother immediately started in. You know, Serena, if you're going to have us here, the least you could do is cook a proper meal. I held up a hand, silencing her. I walked to the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn. My enabling father, my manipulative mother, my parasitic sister. You're trying to rob someone you once called broken? I said, my voice low and shaking with a controlled fury they had never heard before. You're about to learn how whole I really am. The next 2 days were a performance. I became the daughter they'd always wanted. Solicitous, accommodating, and seemingly oblivious. I told them I'd had a change of heart, that they were right, family was everything. I said they could stay for a month while they figured things out. The relief on their faces was sickening. They thought they had won. Behind the scenes, I was moving pieces into place. I hired a lawyer. I had Aaliyah compile a dossier on Roslyn's financial situation, including the parental neglect complaints that had been filed with her children's school. And I planned a dinner party. Just a few people, I told them casually. My business partner, Meki, will be here, and I'd love for you to meet my lawyer just to get some informal advice on your situation. I also invited Felicity's school counselor. I thought it would be good for her to see Felicity in a stable home environment. My mother preened, delighted at the chance to hold court. Roslyn was wary but too arrogant to refuse. They had no idea they were walking into a meticulously set trap. The night of the dinner, I was a gracious host. I served an elaborate meal, poured expensive wine, and guided the conversation. Makey was charming, my lawyer, Ms. Davies, was professional and warm, and the school counselor, Mrs. Gable, observed everything with a quiet intensity. My family, feeling validated, put on their best faces. Christine bragged about my sudden success, and Rosalind spoke of her temporary setback with the air of a tragic heroine. After dessert, I stood up, tapping my wine glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I wanted to gather everyone here tonight for a formal announcement." I nodded to Meki, who discreetly turned on his phone's video camera, placing it on the sideboard where it had a clear view of the table. "As of this moment," I continued, my eyes locking onto my mother's, "my family are no longer guests in this house. They are trespassers. Ms. Davies will be filing a restraining order first thing in the morning on my behalf. They have 1 hour to collect their things and vacate the premises." The color drained from Christine's face. Rosalind shot to her feet. "You can't do this. We have rights." "You have no rights here," Ms. Davies interjected calmly. "You are not on the lease, you do not pay bills, and you have established no legal tenancy. You are here under Serena's explicit temporary permission, which has now been revoked." But you said we could stay," my father stammered, looking utterly bewildered. "I lied," I said simply, "a skill I learned from watching you all for 33 years. I picked up a small remote from the table. "You see, you've all been very vocal about my perceived failings over the years. You've had a lot to say about my worth. I thought it was only fair to return the favor." I pressed a button. A Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf crackled to life. My mother's voice, sharp and cruel, filled the room. It was a recording from one of the hidden cameras. "She owes us this. After all the embarrassment she's caused, being barren, this house is the least she can do to make up for being such a broken, useless daughter." I pressed the button again. Now it was Rosalind's voice, giddy and conspiratorial. My lawyer says it'll be a nightmare for her to evict me. Maybe I can even argue I have an equity stake. She'll have to buy me out to get rid of me. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother looked like she'd been turned to stone. Rosalind was shaking, her face a mottled red. Mrs. Gable, the school counselor, was taking meticulous notes. I looked at them, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. You didn't come here for shelter. You came here to colonize, to take what I built because you felt entitled to it. You called me broken, but you're the ones who are hollow. Suddenly, there was a scrape of a chair. Felicity, who had been silent through the whole ordeal, stood up. Tears were streaming down her face. She walked around the table, past her stunned mother and grandmother, and came to stand by my side. She wrapped her arms around my waist. I want to live with you, she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. Before anyone could react, my phone buzzed on the table. It was an email notification. The sender's name made my blood freeze. Percy Myers. The subject line was simple. My kids, my share. The arrival of Percy's email was a grenade tossed into an already volatile room. Rosalind stared at my phone, her face a mask of horror. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, raised an eyebrow, and Makey shot me a look of concern. I ignored them all, my focus narrowing to the immediate threat. My family was still in my house. The hour starts now, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Ms. Davies and Mrs. Gable, thank you for your time. Makey, would you mind staying? He nodded, a silent promise of support. The two women left, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from public humiliation to raw, private fury. You set us up, Christine shrieked, finding her voice. This is monstrous. No, I replied calmly. Monstrous is disowning your child. Monstrous is trying to steal her home. This is just consequences. I watched them scramble to pack, their movements frantic and clumsy. They stuffed clothes into garbage bags, their pride in tatters. Felicity stayed by my side, a silent, defiant sentinel. When Rosalind tried to grab her arm, Felicity pulled away. I'm not going with you, she said, her young voice firm. We'll discuss that later, Rosalind hissed, her eyes wild. Within the hour, they were gone. The minivan peeled out of my driveway, leaving a trail of exhaust and shattered relationships in its wake. I closed the door, the click of the lock echoing in the sudden, blessed silence. The next day, I met Percy at a neutral coffee shop. He was exactly as I remembered him, slick, handsome, and radiating an aura of cheap cologne and desperation. He thought he was coming to meet an ally, someone he could team up with against his estranged wife. She's trying to cut me out, he said, leaning forward conspiratorially, telling everyone I abandoned the kids. But I hear you've been helping her, that she's living in your big, fancy house. I took a slow sip of my latte. She was, I said. Things have changed, but you're right, she's been making some interesting plans. I let that hang in the air. She was telling me just the other day how she's planning to sue you for full custody and maximum child support. Said she's got a lawyer who thinks she can get everything, the car, what's left of the savings. She seems to think you're a deadbeat with no legal standing. I wasn't lying, just curating the truth. I was feeding his own worst fears back to him, seasoned with Rosalind's own brand of selfish scheming. Percy's face darkened. She what? That little, after I gave her everything? Her words, not mine, I said with a small shrug. She seems to think she has the upper hand. Living in my house was part of her strategy to look like a stable parent. I didn't need to do anything else. I had wound him up and pointed him in Rosalind's direction. He left the coffee shop in a rage, pulling out his phone. I knew with absolute certainty that Rosalind's life was about to get exponentially more difficult. It didn't take long. 2 days later, my mother called, her voice a hysterical screech. Percy was threatening to sue for full custody unless Rosalind signed over the minivan and the last of their joint savings account. He was using my words as ammunition, twisting them to make it sound like Rosalind and I had been plotting against him. "This is your fault," Christine screamed into the phone. "You turned him against her. You have to fix this. You have to give Rosalind money. You have to help her fight him." And that's when I finally snapped. The years of quiet pain, of forced smiles and bitten back words erupted out of me in a torrent. "My fault?" I yelled, pacing my studio, the colors on the canvases blurring around me. "You want to talk about fault? You stood by and called me broken while your golden child built a life on a foundation of lies. You threw me away because I couldn't give you grandchildren, and now you want me to pay for the ones she can't take care of? You reap what you sow, all of you. You planted a garden of poison and you are shocked that you don't get to harvest roses. This is your mess, Rosalind's mess, Percy's mess. You can all drown in it together. Do not call me again." I hung up, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was over. The final tie was severed. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Felicity standing on my porch. She had a small suitcase in one hand and her school backpack over her shoulder. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "They're at a motel," she said quietly. "Grandma and Mom just scream at each other all day. I took a bus." She looked up at me, her expression a heartbreaking mix of hope and fear. "You said your house was for making art. I want to make something real." The process of becoming Felicity's legal guardian was an education in navigating a system designed for chaos. It involved social workers, court dates, and a mountain of paperwork. Rosalind fought it, of course, but her fight was disorganized and fueled by spite rather than genuine maternal concern. She missed appointments. She failed mandated drug tests. Mrs. Gable's testimony about the neglect, combined with my stable home and Felicity's unwavering desire to stay with me, made the judge's decision straightforward. 6 months after she appeared on my doorstep with a suitcase, the papers were signed. She was mine to care for. Life with a teenager was a different kind of quiet. It was filled with the soft sounds of Felicity sketching in the living room, the muffled beat of music from her bedroom, and late-night conversations over bowls of ice cream. We found a rhythm. I taught her how to stretch a canvas, and she taught me about the complex social hierarchies of the 9th grade. My house, once a fortress of solitude, became a home. The fallout for the rest of my family was swift and brutal. The parental neglect investigation, spurred by Mrs. Gable's report, put Rosalind under a microscope she couldn't withstand. She lost custody of Mason and Chloe, who were placed in temporary foster care pending my parents' application to become their guardians. To afford the legal fees and the expense of raising 2 young children, my parents had to sell their polished mahogany dining table and the house that went with it. They drained their retirement savings and moved into a cramped condo in a senior living community an hour away. Rosalind, stripped of her children and her financial safety nets, drifted, taking low-wage jobs and living in a series of grim apartments. Her public grace had evaporated, leaving only the bitter residue of her choices. My business, meanwhile, flourished. With the threat of my family neutralized, Makey and I took on bigger projects, expanding our reach. We were partners in every sense of the word, our late-night strategy sessions often bleeding into shared dinners and easy laughter. The romantic tension that had simmered beneath the surface for years finally had room to breathe. Inspired by Felicity, I used some of the company's profits to launch a new initiative. We rented a small studio space downtown and started a series of free workshops for young women, teaching them everything from digital art and graphic design to how to write a business plan. We called it Rebuild You. It was my way of giving others the tools I'd had to forge for myself. There is one room in my house that remains locked. It's the small bedroom at the very end of the hall, the one that was never designated as a nursery or a playroom. It was just a spare room, waiting for a purpose. After my family left, I cleared it out completely. I painted the walls a stark, clinical white. In the center of the room, I placed a single pedestal. On top of it sits the small, innocuous Bluetooth speaker I used at the dinner party. It's a museum of one, a monument to the moment I took my power back. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I stand in the doorway and look at it. I never say what's inside, but I smile every time I walk past it. They called me broken, but I wasn't broken. I was just building something they couldn't imagine, and now they'll never be welcome inside it again.